Max Keiser in Paris. Was he part of a revolution, Steve Jobs, do you believe?
Well, I have to wonder what the success of Apple and Steve Jobs would be had they not received a massive government subsidy in the form of oppressive intellectual property law and draconian copyright law. This is something that Steve Jobs supported in both as a technology magnate and as a film producer in Hollywood. The effort to extend copyright, for example, has been one of the worst innovation killers of the past few decades. And Steve Jobs, of course, benefited magnificently from that. So if you take away this huge government subsidy, would the company really be in the position that it is today? I don't think so.
Now, there was also something within Apple which is a relationship with music. The creation of the iPod changed the way that people listen to and relate to music. Duncan Bell?
Yes, that's fair to say. I mean, it put people's entire music collection into one little device they could carry around with them. It's it hasn't all about the demise of the album, the long-playing record, whatever you want to call it, as we know. But people don't really listen to albums all the way through. They hop around between their favourite tracks from lots of different sources, sort of almost like a DJ constructing a set as they're going along. Also, of course, as was alluded to earlier, the fact that it's all entirely digital, in many ways, ironically, although Apple itself is very committed to rights management and what have you, did obviously cause a massive upsurge in the pirating, the electronic pirating of music, which has changed the face of the music industry in all manner of ways.
Max Keiser, that particular point about how the face of the music industry was changed by the invention of a simple device?
Well, sure. Apple famously missed the internet. That was something they had to play catch-up with after others pioneered that use of the internet space and were doing interesting technological things. Apple is very committed to the desktop. And so they did a great job at playing catch-up. As far as the relationship to the machine, as was brought up earlier, we can't forget that these machines are built essentially by slave labor in China, while Apple, the company, sits on $80 billion worth of cash. They could hire, obviously, people in America to do those jobs and help Americans get jobs instead of exporting to China and losing that form of job growth in the U.S. So again, the company has been able to grow, but at what cost? $80 billion in cash is unconscionable amount of cash for a company to have. As a matter of fact, it does kind of go into a gray area in terms of companies being allowed to have that much cash without paying a dividend. And the stock itself came under scrutiny just a few years ago with a backdating of options scandal that Steve Jobs was implicated in, taking advantage of the 9/11 tragedy to award themselves cheap stock at a cheap price. So again, if it weren't for the loopholes and for the government subsidies and for the slave labor, would the stock be where it is today?
The one argument that admirers of Steve Jobs have been putting since his death and before was his ability to deal with adversity. Remember, he got pushed out of Apple. In that period away, he started that remarkably successful animated movie company, which changed the face of animated movies, came back to Apple and reached his best period. This ability of coming back from adversity, how important a mark of the man is that?
No doubt Steve Jobs is a tenacious fellow. But again, with Pixar, you're talking about a copyright monopoly position and controlling the distribution and creation of intellectual property and building a monopoly position based on that. I mean, if we're looking for revolutionaries, we should talk about people like Richard Stallman, who created the free software movement, which is really behind the Cairo movement and the Tunis movement, not Apple Computer and a bunch of copyright protectionist lobbyists. That's really behind the social movement that we see now. These are the true revolutionaries in the software movement, and they don't get enough attention, in my opinion.